Okay, new platform here. Let me see if it's working. I'm checking my channel. Don't see it showing up. What is going on? Oh, there it is. Check the sound.
Don't see it showing.
Oh, I hear myself. Okay. So sorry for the wait. Been so much going on, and I've been chilling, to be honest with you too, in light of all this. But I gotta go out of town this weekend, and I was gonna, anyway. But I'm gonna go through this chapter. I want to finish this chapter today, and hopefully, if I'm still feeling up to it, I'll do another chapter or section of Phenomenology of Spirit by Hegel. I'm not even sure if anybody's going to show up for this. That's fine. I wanted to kind of test this new software out because apparently you can only use Melanat for free for 30 days, and I still don't have enough to be, paying for stuff like that. But Streamlab, this is Streamlab. Seems it's a lot more complicated. I'm not going to lie, but it seems more powerful as well. It seems to be a lot of flexibility options and things like that. So we'll see how this works and how it flies. And let me see. Can I? Oh. Right. I'm gonna test the chat because I want to see where it pops up. I think it pops up on the side here.
We'll see how this works.
Let's see if it pops up on the screen as well. Okay, I see it on my side. It does not pop up on the stream, which is fine. It doesn't really matter. Oh, it does. Never mind. It's delayed. Interesting. Cool.
Let's see if it pops up on the screen as well.
That's a long delay.
Okay, I see it on the side.
Maybe because I paused it.
Does not pop up on the stream.
Yeah, that's a long delay.
Oh, it does. There's in the chat.
Goodness. Okay. All right, we'll get to it. So, for those that have not been following this part of this series, I've been going through the Anarchy Works book. So it's pretty great, awesome actually. It helped me to learn a lot about anarchy so far. You can see the chapters here. Now I've spent a brief time just skimming through a bunch of these chapters a couple weeks ago, maybe a couple months ago by now. But I wanted to really read this book, and of course I really enjoy streaming it, so or recording myself doing so. So I've been doing that in the last couple of videos, but now I'm streaming more. I'm gonna try that out. So I read all these other sections. They're great sections. If you have not seen that, these videos or read this yourself, I highly suggest that you do. This is free online. Just go to anarchy.works. See it here. Anarchy.works. And you'll see this here. We have the Anarchy Works book and some FAQs to answer other questions, and you have the Anarchist Library as well, where they have a whole bunch of other free books. That's pretty awesome. Books, essays, whatever. But anyways, each of these were extremely awesome, and I like that they tackle this question of human nature, because that's something we see all the time. It's like people complain about, oh, this is not possible because human nature, we're just inherently greedy or whatever. But no, I knew that, because I've been studying a lot of psychology and all this other stuff, sociology, history. But it's nice to see other folks, also showing that here. And this is a fairly older book, not that much older, a couple years. But it goes into the fact that, many of these complaints that people have is not really a function of human nature. And I've said this myself in this podcast today. Put it really simply. I said, it's not that human nature is bad. It's that we adapt to the environment and we create environments that are bad for us, you know. And so our human nature pretty much, I didn't say that actually, I just came up with that again. But anyways, we reflect our environment, you know, and because we have these, you know, manipulative powers, it's powers of understanding, we can change our environment as well. You know, our physical environment, our psychological, economic, political, whatever, right? We can change all these environments and then we change our behaviors to reflect that environment or to adapt to that environment. So for better or worse, we adapt to whatever environment we have. And so if you really think human nature is bad, then you have to look at the environment that you live in and realize it's our environment that's bad and that the environment that we created for ourselves. So if you want to create a better world, you have to create a better environment. You have to understand that first of all, it's not just pure human nature. That's like giving up on the problem. But yeah, by understanding human nature, we can, you know, make way much realer progress. I think because a lot of problems begin because they think, oh, we can't solve these problems, so therefore we have to create, you know, laws or whatever to stop people from doing bad things. Like, no, that's not how human nature works. But anyways, let's get into this. It says, aren't domination and authority natural? Right? Many people assume these things. Let's get into it. Nowadays, it is harder to make ideological justifications for the state. A massive body of research demonstrates that many human societies have been staunchly egalitarian, and that even within capitalism, many people continue to form egalitarian networks and communities. Yep, beautiful. In order to reconcile this with their view that evolution is a matter of fierce competition, I have something to say about that. Like, I have a theory that competition is actually not what it's made out to be. Like, a lot of people say, oh, innovation is a product of competition, and all this other good competition is good, and all this other stuff. But when I'm, especially as I've been learning more about nature and all this other stuff, I've been looking at. I don't think competition is the thing, like what has drives us or anything like that. I think it's kind of a byproduct, or maybe even an illusion into what's really going on. But let's see if they get into it. Competition sometimes has postulated a human egalitarian syndrome, theorizing that humans evolved to live in close-knit, homogeneous groups in which the passing on of members' genes was not assured by the survival of the individual, but by the survival of the group. Yeah, we are an extremely social creature. I could see that being an argument. According to this theory, cooperation and egalitarianism prevailed within these groups because it was in everyone's genetic self-interest that the group survived. Genetic competition occurred between different groups, and the groups that did the best job of taking care of their members were the ones who pass on their genes. Direct genetic competition between individuals was superseded by competition between different groups employing different social strategies. And humans evolved a whole host of social skills that allow for greater cooperation. This would explain why, for most of human existence, we have lived in societies with little or no hierarchy, until certain technological developments allowed some societies to stratify and dominate their neighbors. Yep, that seems to be, you know, a general pattern as I've been looking into anthropology and history and things like that, where the fact that we've lived in these non-hierarchical structures for over 100,000 years, over roughly what 200,000 years, and I don't mean as like cavemen or anything like that, whatever that means. I mean as humans as we are now, like Homo sapiens sapiens, like people who've had similar brains, pretty much the exact same brain that we have now to 100, 200,000 years ago, right? Humans have evolved from the apes and all this other stuff like, you know, 2 million years ago. But Homo sapiens sapiens, our people like us, you know, have been in existence for a long time. And only in the very recently, relatively recently, have we developed these hierarchical structures. So what happened, right? What was the change? Turns out, you know, during the Neolithic Revolution, when you hear that word revolution, you think it was a quick thing, like a span of a couple of years or something like that. But no, it actually was thousands of years. It took thousands of years to switch from a mostly hunter-gatherer, foraging, non-hierarchical structures into agricultural-based hierarchical structures. That took thousands of years, and it was going back and forth, you know, constantly. So it wasn't like some, oh yes, this is an obviously better case, it wasn't, right? I think personally that it was more like a virus. Like we were trying to fight the virus of hierarchical structures, but of course, you know, as with the virus, it is possible to lose, and it's taken over the host, our society. But I know people don't see it like that. They'll see it like, we made progress and all this other stuff. But if we look around to where we see now, you got to question that progress. Anyways, that is not to say that domination and authority were unnatural, and that technology was a forbidden fruit that corrupted and otherwise innocent humanity. In fact, some hunter-gatherer societies were so patriarchal they use gang rape as a form of punishment against women. And some societies with agriculture and metal tools have been fiercely egalitarian. Yeah, that's a good point too. Some of the peoples in North America's Pacific, and North America's Pacific Northwest were sedentary hunter-gatherers, and they had a heavily stratified society with the slave class. And at the far end of the technological spectrum, nomadic hunter-gatherer groups in Australia were dominated by male elders. Older men could have multiple wives, younger men had none, and women were evidently doled out like social property. Yeah, that's another thing too. Is when people think about hunter-gatherers and foragers and all this other stuff, they think about one type of, structure. But in reality, just like our society today, it was a very wide-ranging spectrum, right, of super nomadic tribes and more settlement-based folks. Went back and forth between patriarchal, matriarchal, patrilineal, all this other stuff, like, and complexity. I don't really like to use that word because we kind of it's oversimplified where we say, a settled structure, a place that builds cities and stuff like that is more complex, but it's not. It just has a complexity in a different way. Like this complexity is stratified or abstracted in a different way, right? Because many foraging hunter-gatherers had complex social behaviors, right? In a place where it was fiercely nomadic or egalitarian or whatever, if they didn't have like typical laws and cities and ledgers and stuff like that, their complexity was not in that space. It was in the space of social behavior, trying to negotiate and figure out, social cues and go back and forth between like having a gift-giving economy. They call that a less complex, simple relationship or economy than a fiat currency one that we have today. But it's really not. It's just complex in a different way. Anyways, humans are capable of both authoritarian and anti-authoritarian behavior. Horizontal societies that were not intentionally anti-authoritarian could easily have developed coercive hierarchies when new technologies made that possible. And even without a lot of technology, they could make life hell for groups considered inferior. It seems that the most common forms of inequality among otherwise egalitarian societies were gender and age discrimination, which could accustom a society to inequality and create the prototype for a power structure, ruled by male elders. This structure could become more powerful over time with the development of metal tools and weapons, surpluses, cities, and the like. Yeah, that's why the Neolithic Revolution took so long, right, to switch from this hunter-gatherer, nomadic tribes and everything like that into cities, because it wasn't clear. It wasn't clear that we should go that route, or what that should look like, or the type of structures they would have. And many of these cities, in and of themselves, were not inherently, super hierarchical. Many of them were, because a city is inherently, more hierarchical than a, nomadic tribe. But there are still many cities that were fairly, decentralized and things like that, which I would love to get into. I had a theory this morning in my podcast where I said, like I said before with the environment, like humans, I think human nature is very much, dependent on the environment and the environment that we create for ourselves. And I'll be willing to wager, I'll be willing to see if there is a correlation and even a causation between the type of environment that we structure, in, specifically when we structure vertically hierarchical environments, and how people regard themselves and other humans. Like, I think that when people say they hate other humans or think that other humans are inherently violent and greedy and all this other stuff, I think that's actually a reflection of the environment those humans exist in. As in, if those humans exist in a bad environment, in a corruptive, coercive rather environment, then the people in that society will view other people, if not themselves, at least other people, as inherently greedy, violent, whatever, and have to be tamed, right? I think there's almost certainly a correlation there, and most likely a causation that the creating a society of vertical coercive structure also corrupts the human psyche and kind of bends or makes human nature adapt into a space where greed or violence and things like this are justified or kind of encouraged in some ways. But yeah, I want to do like some type of meta-analysis on that. The point, though, is that these forms of inequality were not inevitable. Societies that frowned on authoritarian behaviors consciously avoided the rise of hierarchy. In fact, many societies have given up centralized organization or technologies that allow for domination. This shows that history is not a one-way track. For example, the Moroccan Amazigh or Berbers did not form centralized political systems over the past several centuries, even while other societies around them did. That's good to know. I gotta look them up. I've heard of them a little bit. Establishing a dynasty is next to impossible, wrote one commentator, due to the fact that the chief is faced with constant revolt, which ultimately becomes successful and returns the system to the old decentralized anarchic order. Interesting. Yeah. Put the note down here. Check out the citations. Definitely want to look more into that. That seems promising. Anthropological. Interesting. This one, 1982. Alright, so I got to look that up. This is a great book for, resources and stuff too. Do some good research. What is the factor that allows societies to avoid domination and coercive authority? A study by Christopher Bohm, surveying dozens of egalitarian societies on all continents, including peoples who lived as foragers, horticulturalists, agriculturalists, and pastoralists, found that the common factor is a conscious desire to remain egalitarian, an anti-authoritarian culture. Ooh, we getting there, right? That's what I'm talking about, that environment. See, it's already, this is why I like making these predictions and making these theories. So it seems like there's some meat there on those bones. The primary and most immediate cause of egalitarian behavior is a moralistic determination on the part of a local group's main political actors that no one of its members should be allowed to dominate the others. Rather than culture being determined by material conditions, it seems that culture shapes the social structures that reproduce a people's material conditions. See? That's exactly what the hell I just said, man. That's wild. Yo. I'm telling you, I didn't read this. Wow. Rather than culture being determined by material conditions, it seems that the culture shapes the social structures that reproduce a people's material conditions. Basically what I just said, the environment. So that's what culture is, right? It's the psychological, sociological environment that functions to kind of constrain at the same time as reflect, the behaviors in which we want or adapt to. It's kind of like it's a constant cycle, is what I said before earlier this morning, where it's not just we create the environment and it just reflects our behavior, so therefore it's human nature. Like no, it's we change our environment, we restructure our environment. Maybe we're learning from something, or we have some idea about how the world works, and then we have we behave a certain way according to how we believe the world works, and then we get the results of that, right? We see what that does in our society or whatever, and then we change the culture again. Our culture kind of reflects those changes and our result, and then we shift things based on where we want to go, what we want our society to look like, what we value in that society, and So it's a constant back and forth between kind of how we think, how we're perceiving the world, and how we're behaving, right? So basically, this is like this is beautiful. It's a great way of saying it too. Culture shapes the social structures that reproduce the people's material conditions. I gotta tweet that. Let me see. It says 15. Egalitarian behavior and reverse dominant hierarchy. Oh yeah, I've read some of this before because they were earlier in the chapter. They also cited this, talking about well, this idea of reverse dominance hierarchy, of how different cultures, created different ways in which people would support their egalitarian, decentralized structures and culture and stuff like that. Somebody's messaging me on Discord. Let me link people my Discord, so get some folks in the chat if possible. I have a very, very small Discord, like 5 people. Only like 2 people are active, so I doubt anybody will come, but maybe. Do I have a link? Where can I get a link? I might just have to go to my page. Yeah, 1 second. Not like anybody's listening right now anyways. This is mostly for the recording. And I'm not going to go back and edit it, so you can skip through a little bit. Probably should edit my videos more, but I'm just like, oh. If I knew I was going to edit, I probably wouldn't do videos, I'm going to be honest with you. It's just such a pain. That's what stopped me from doing my other interview series, which is doing great. I just, doing all them edits. And it wasn't even a whole lot. Like, I wasn't doing anything special, but I was like cutting out some things and trying to make it a little bit cleaner. And this wasn't working out for me. Okay, I got the link. Let me switch on over. Oh, come on, my computer's so slow. I might just have to do it on my phone, cause yeah, I'm gonna have to do it on my phone. This is also why I've been kind of wondering if I should wait to really get into streaming or making videos, period, because like this computer is I have like a 2015 MacBook, might be 2014, 2013, but it is annoying. Alright. Almost done. Now I gotta get the link on here. Oh, I have to share on my Twitter too. Should probably link this to some of my Anarchy Discords I'm in, but I don't feel like doing that. Maybe next time. I want to embarrass myself in front of my friends. Oh, let me stop. Okay. In certain situations, some form of leadership is inevitable, as some people have more skills or a more charismatic personality. Consciously egalitarian societies respond to these situations not by institutionalizing the position of a leader, but by not affording a leader any special privileges, or by fostering. Consciously egalitarian societies respond to this situation by not institutionalizing the position of leader, by not affording a leader any special privileges, or by fostering a culture that makes it shameful for that person to flaunt his or her leadership or try to gain power over others. Yeah, that's beautiful. Because unfortunately, we do almost the exact opposite. We say, oh yeah, we should praise people for being a leader, right? But then what we know, and we know this for a fact, like it's a common psychological and kind of sociological data point is like our leadership positions are flocked to by narcissistic, egotistic people, psychopathic people, people who just want power rather than people who actually are good leaders. There was even a more recent study that showed that from childhood, right, in schools, people automatically already begin to give praise to people who are more charismatic, regardless of whether or not they're actually a good leader, right? I need to pull that up again. I forgot. I'm not sure if I saved that in my pocket. But apparently, this is a new study they did, and it was very fascinating. But they showed how even with kids, like when you randomly assigned, I think they randomly assigned some kids and all this other stuff. Let me see if I can find it here. I probably should have tagged it. Let me spell narcissism. That's not how you spell it. I think it's with two S's. I don't think this is it. I need to tag my things more often. Yeah, that's not it. Well, I have to find it later and post it, but it was a really great study showing how, like I said, people who were charismatic, right? Kids who were charismatic were often selected to be leaders, or rather thought to be good leaders, even when they didn't actually help the group, achieve their task more or anything like that. And even when they were worse, right? They were worse off afterwards. The group still thought they were a good leader just because they were more charismatic, more outgoing, and stuff like that. So it's a pretty bad cultural problem. And I say cultural because people automatically assume it's just human nature, but it's not. Even though this happened with kids, you have to realize that kids in school already have learned a lot from growing up to that age. This happened in elementary school, and kids by that age already have learned a lot about the culture from their parents, from their peers, and all this other stuff. Plus the fact that school itself, does the exact same thing, rewards people who are outgoing or who, are outspoken and all this other stuff. And by the age you're already, pretty much indoctrinated. Not permanently so, but definitely have a strong understanding of what the current culture is. So it is a strongly cultural thing, and many other cultures, teach their kids in different ways. And it's funny because I've been talking to some folks on YouTube comments and all that. YouTube comments is not really a great place for good conversation, but sometimes you can find some good stuff. But I think it was a video by Zoe Baker talking about egalitarianism throughout different societies and all this other stuff. And they were talking about how some societies, like this book mentioned, supported anti-authoritarian means and anti-ego means. So where they brought out the Koyasan folks, where they make fun of the meat, right? So when you go hunting and you bring some meat to the thing, back to the place, they say, oh, you probably got something, something weak, something it's not good enough to even support all of us, right? So they would make fun of the meat, and it's like, oh yeah, it's not good enough and all this other stuff, and just ribbing on them. And it's even expected for the hunter who did, do that, the shooting and stuff like that, who maybe they did amazing, hunting this new deer or whatever they were hunting. They were expected to not talk about it. Just be like, oh no, don't worry about it. I ain't really getting nothing, And it's a funny, to me, it's a funny idea of, or funny kind of ribbing type of thing, because I do that with my siblings all the time. I'm like, oh no, it's not nothing, I just say it wasn't nothing. But in the comments, people are like, oh, that's humble bragging. Oh, that's that's bullying and stuff like that. I'm just like, what? Huh? Why do? That's weird. Because I don't see that as bullying or humble bragging. That's just normal where I come from, where you don't really brag about what you did, and people, you kind of encourage a sense of humility, right? From a very young age, you encourage that sense of humility. And of course, it can be abused, definitely, right? Especially in our current society that's highly patriarchal, um, with the hierarchical structure and stuff like that. Like, yes, it is often abused, and it can, be bullying and all this other stuff. It can be gaslighting, all this stuff. But that happens regardless, right? That's not a the gaslighting, all this other stuff is not a factor of this ego killing, culture. It's a factor of the ego building culture, right? The fact that certain people who are narcissistic and egotistical, they will bully you because they don't want to give you your roses, right? They don't want to. They want to be the ones that's praised and all this other stuff. So it's our culture. It's a cultural difference, and well, I was going with that is that people kind of hear this idea of teaching kids at a young age to be humble as a bad thing, right? As brainwashing, all this other stuff, when they don't realize that we're already brainwashing our kids, right? Raising kids in general is brainwashing one way or another. It's that's what learning is in a way, right? We might see that as being pedantic or something like that, but the point here is that kids are learning what the culture is, right? And that culture is in and of itself a byproduct of our environment, of our expectations, of our behaviors and things like that that we support. It's not an objective thing. It's not objectively human nature, right? It's what we value, what we think we should encourage, and all this other stuff. So, when you hear stories about, narcissism, or really data about narcissism and ego and all that stuff being more kind of popular and being found more in positions of power, that's why. It's because of a cultural problem. Anyways, goodness, went way off tangent here. What was I? Constantly getting into this. Yeah, okay. So furthermore, leadership positions, goodness. Yeah, furthermore, leadership positions change from one situation to another, depending on the skills needed for the task at hand. The leaders during a hunt are different from the leaders during house building or ceremonies. If a person in a leadership role, goodness, I always got. If a person in a leadership role tries to gain more power or dominate his or her peers, the rest of the group employs intentional leveling mechanisms. Behaviors intended to bring the leader back down to earth. For example, among many anti-authoritarian hunter-gatherer societies, the most skillful hunter in the band faces criticism. Yep. Criticism and ridicule if he is seen to brag and use his talents to boost his ego rather than for the benefit of the whole group. Exactly, right? I just said I should have just kept reading. If these social pressures do not work, the sanctions escalate, and in many egalitarian societies, in the final instance, they will kick out or kill a leader who is incurably authoritarian. Ooh, ain't that something? Long before that leader is able to assume coercive powers. These reverse dominance hierarchies in which the leaders must obey popular will because they are powerless to maintain their positions of leadership without support, have appeared in many different societies and functioned over long periods of time. That's good. I know I need to continue, but this is so important, right? Because today we hear all the time, oh yeah, the politicians and the people in power, they're here to do your will, they're at your service, right? But they literally have no actual, you know, responsibility or no real accountability. We hear it all the time. Oh, keep these people accountable. Keep these people accountable. But what can we really do? Vote them out, and then they still have all the money, all the influence. Pretty much most of the influence they have. The only difference between being voted out or whatever is just public scrutiny. And yes, it's some level of importance. Yeah, you can say, oh yeah, public scrutiny, does a little bit, brings the eye on them. If they do too many illegal things, then they can get caught. But we all know for a fact that people get away with really, really messed up things all the time. Like it's not even a conspiracy at this point to to talk about the fact that our government is corrupt. And the fact that our government is corrupt is not a conspiracy theory. It's a deeply, deeply concerning problem with our culture, with our society, right? The fact that we think it's just par for the course, it's just, part of the doing business. But no, it's not. As we see here, it's a part of the culture in which we create for ourselves. The systems thinking, right? I've learned systems thinking recently. I see it everywhere now. Like a system is what a system does. If we worried about our government being corrupt, it's because we create a corrupt government. People don't want to hear that. They say, "Oh no, blah blah blah." But as you look into history, as you look into psychology, as you look into culture, sociology, you understand why, right? That's just the government. That's the system. That is the system that we have created for ourselves. And this is why it's so important to learn about this stuff. Even if you don't agree with anarchy for whatever reason, most likely because you don't understand anarchy. But even if you do, right, you have to kind of admit that this is good data. Like this is good information. This tells you how and why we are in this problem that we're in, right? So whether or not you agree with this specific way of doing things, at least I think it's beneficial to understand, you know, why we do what we do and why our system is so corrupt or cracked and broken or whatever. It's not broken, that's just how it's designed. But anyways, yeah, let's continue. Long periods of time. All right. Some of the egalitarian societies documented in Boehm's survey have a chief or a shaman who plays a ritual role or acts as an impartial mediator in disputes. Others appoint a leader in times of trouble or have a peace chief and a war chief. But these positions of leadership are not coercive and over hundreds of years have not developed into authoritarian roles. Interesting. That means generational, right? Not just one, group of people who are very logical. It's the fact that they, over hundreds of years, they can pass down this idea. Often the people who fill these roles see them as a temporary social responsibility, which they wish to hand off swiftly because of the higher level of criticism and responsibility they face while occupying them. That is such, oh my gosh, I'm telling you, it's so interesting because now it's like, today, yeah, you have some political, like I said, you have some public scrutiny when you're a politician or when you're in some public-facing thing, but most people, from what I understand, from accountability and things like that, it's just a kind of a annoying thing. It's like oh yeah, there's more public criticism, and you just take that part for the course. But it's not like it's, oh man, I really don't want to do all this. Like I want to get in, get out, right? Do my work, get in, get out, right? Like that's not an understanding nowadays. Nowadays it's just like, oh yeah, it's whatever. Like people forget or whatever. It's really sad how far we've fallen as a society. Yes, as a society, as in, I really think in many ways these foraging hunter-gatherer cultures were more advanced as a society than where we are today. And people are not gonna like that. People are all the way they're cavemen. They ain't had technology and all this other stuff. But if you can maintain a reverse dominance hierarchy, anti-authoritarian hierarchy for a long period of time, that's way more advanced than what we have today. I mean, goodness, people can't even imagine this. The fact that most people won't even believe this is possible. Does that not speak to the depths of which we fall, in the depths of our depravity? And again, it's not human nature. It's the fact that we have created this. This is what our culture is today. But cultures can change. It just takes learning by it. It takes being self-aware, education, and the will to do so. Let's continue. European civilization has historically demonstrated a much higher tolerance for authoritarianism than the egalitarian societies described in the survey. Yet as the political and economic systems that would become the modern state and capitalism were developing in Europe, there were a number of rebellions that demonstrate that even here authority was an imposition. One of the greatest of these rebellions was a peasants' war. In 1524 and 1525, as many as 300,000 peasant insurgents, joined by townsfolk and some lesser nobility, rose up against the property owners in the church hierarchy in a war that left about 100,000 people dead throughout Bavaria, Saxony, Thuringen, Schwaben, Alsace, as well as parts of what are now Switzerland and Austria. The princes and clergy of the Holy Roman Empire had been steadily increasing taxes to pay for rising administrative and military costs as government became more top-heavy. The artisans and workers of the towns were affected by these taxes, but peasants received the heaviest burden. To increase their power and their revenue, princes forced free peasants into serfdom and resurrected Roman civil law, which instituted private ownership of land, something of a step backwards from the feudal system in which the land was a trust between peasant and lord that involved rights and obligations. Wow, that's interesting. That's problematic because what I really fear, one thing that really worries me today is the fact that so many people are so disgruntled about, the world. Many of these statements I said today is not conspiracy, is not controversial. The fact that our government is corrupt is not even a controversial statement. Many people will agree all across the political spectrum, right? And when you have that problem where all these people don't like the government or for one reason or another, it's a matter of time before it bubbles up into something like this, into a war, into a violent insurgency. I don't want to see that. I don't like violence. I think it has its place, but large-scale violence is rarely ever super useful because a large amount of the time with large-scale violence, it just creates more vengeance, more revenge, and cycle of blood and all this other stuff. And people don't learn the lessons, right? Sometimes, like I said, sometimes it has its place. I'm not gonna lie, but especially in a large-scale war, did people learn, right? If they win their for their side or whatever they thought they were going to learn, I'm sorry, achieve. What happens after, right? Then you have to rebuild, then you have to do all this other stuff, and a majority of the time, it goes right back to where it was before, or it gets worse. And that's not because I don't think that's because these people didn't know what they're doing or anything like that. I just think like the means do not create the ends, or whatever the saying goes. Like I don't think the means are foreign ends. Like I think the means in which you create an end, right? The matter in which you in which you achieve something that you want to achieve matters, right? If you use violence to create a more free society, probably gonna have to face violence again to maintain it, or to fight back against the people who are hurt or whatever, right? Like it's almost always a cycle, and we see that throughout history. Many people, of course, would disagree with this too. They're like, oh no, some people think violence is the answer for a lot of things, and they can point back to all these other stories and stuff like that. But I'm looking at the entire roll of history, the last 10,000 years of human civilization in terms of Neolithic civilization. And time again, we see the same cycle, right? I don't know. I think about that a lot. Maybe I might be wrong, but either way, I don't want to live throughout the time like that. Like maybe I'm a coward or something like that, but I just don't want to live through a time where I have to, you have to fight on such a large scale like that. It's just not even terrifying, it's just sad. But anyways, meanwhile, elements of the old feudal hierarchy, such as knighthood and the clergy, were becoming obsolete and conflicted with other elements of the ruling class. The new burger, I think I've heard that term before, mercantile class, as well as many progressive princes, opposed the privileges of the clergy and the conservative structure of the Catholic Church. A new, less centralized structure that could base power in councils in the towns and cities, such as the system proposed by Martin Luther, would allow the new political class to ascend. In the years immediately prior to the war, a number of Anabaptist prophets began traveling around the region, espousing revolutionary ideas against political authority, church doctrine, and even against the reforms of Martin Luther. These people included Thomas Dressel, Nicholas Storch, Mark Thomas Stubner, and most famously Thomas Muntzer. I don't know. Some of them argued for total religious freedom, the end of non-voluntary baptism, and the abolition of government on earth. Ooh, on earth. They were going ham. Needless to say, they were persecuted by Catholic authorities and by supporters of Luther and banned from many cities. But they continued to travel around Bohemia, Bavaria, and Switzerland, winning supporters and stoking peasant rebelliousness. Wow. In 1524, peasants and urban workers met in the Schwarzwald region of Germany and drafted the 12 Articles of the Black Forest. This seems kind of epic. The 12 Articles of the Black Forest. It sounds like a freaking power metal band or power metal album. Oh, that's dope. And the movement they created quickly spread. The articles with biblical references used as justification call for the abolition of serfdom and the freedom of all people, the municipal power for people to elect and remove preachers, the abolition of taxes on cattle and inheritance, a prohibition on the privilege of the nobility to arbitrarily raise taxes, free access to water, hunting, fishing, and the forests, and the restoration of communal lands expropriated by the nobility. Another text printed and circulated in massive quantity by the insurgents was the Bundesord, Bundesord, Bundesordnen. Bundesordnen. Fitness. These are the words. I'm going to look this up. It's kind of irking me. I can't pronounce this. No translations, Google? Okay, whatever. The federal order, which expounded a model social order based on federal municipalities, or based on federated municipalities. Less literate elements of the movement were even more radical, as judged by their actions and the folklore they left behind. Their goal was to wipe the nobility off the face of the earth and institute a mysticist utopia then and there. Wow, that is interesting. These folks weren't playing. Social tension increased throughout the year, as authorities tried to prevent outright rebellion by suppressing rural gatherings such as popular festivals and weddings. In August 1524, the situation finally erupted at Stulingen in the Black Forest region. A countess demanded that the peasants render her a special harvest on a church holiday. Instead, the peasants refused to pay all taxes and formed an army of 1,200 people under the leadership of former mercenary Hans Müller. They marched to the town of Waldstadt and were joined by the townspeople, and then marched on the castle of Stulingen and besieged it. Realizing they needed some kind of military structure, they decided to elect their own captains, sergeants, and corporals. In September, they defended themselves from the Habsburg army in an indecisive battle, and subsequently refused to lay down their arms and beg pardon when entreated to do so. That autumn, peasant strikes, refusals to pay tithes, and rebellions broke out throughout the region, as peasants extended their politics from individual complaints to a unified rejection of the feudal system as a whole. Wow. With the spring-fall of 1525, fighting resumed with ferocity. The peasant armies seized cities and executed large numbers of clergy and nobility. But in February, the Swabian League, an alliance of nobility and clergy in the region, achieved a victory in Italy, where they had been fighting on behalf of Charles V, and were able to bring their troops home and devote them to crushing the peasants. Meanwhile, Martin Luther, the burghers, and the progressive princes withdrew all their support and called for the annihilation of the revolutionary peasants. They wanted to reform the system, not to destroy it, and the uprising had already sufficiently destabilized the power structure. Finally, on May 15, 1525, the main peasant army was decisively defeated at Frankenhausen. Munster and other influential leaders were seized and executed, and the rebellion was put down. However, over the following years, the Anabaptist movement spread throughout Germany, Switzerland, and the Netherlands, and peasant revolts continued to break out, in the hopes that one day the church and the state would be destroyed for good. Wow. That was intense. That was interesting. There should be a movie about that or something. Maybe not really. The anarchists didn't really win in the end, but it's a constant struggle, especially against the large-scale structures. But they say war is the health of the state, unfortunately, and it's very troublesome that Another reason why I'm not sure if war is even the answer, right? Because you end up killing more of your own people than the people in power, because the people in power are like usually a few, but they can, use the others, the people that's not really with them, but they pay them and they think they're with them. They can, all the guards and the soldiers, they can use all of them to fight their battles, right? So it's very rare that even a very, very bloody war, something where you're the the kind of rebellious force is in the winning or is winning. It's very rare, I think, that they are really doing real damage to the people in power, because it's usually the soldiers that are paying for it, right? That are under that problem. And then once again, because the means do not justify the ends, like even when they do, like the French Revolution, right? Even if you do cut off their heads and all this other stuff, if the positions of power are still in power, it doesn't matter if you kill the people, right? Somebody else would just fill that position. That's why you have to restructure the entire thing. You can't just, depend on killing the people and stuff like that. Anyways, capitalism in modern democratic states succeeded in establishing themselves over the following centuries, but they have been forever haunted by the specter of rebellion from below. Within statist societies, the ability to organize without hierarchies still exists today, and the possibility remains to create anti-authoritarian cultures that can bring any would-be leaders back down to earth. It's getting harder and harder to do so nowadays with technology. I'm telling you, man, it's kind of scary. The amount of technology that one person or one small group can hold over a ton of other people, kind of terrifying. Appropriately, much of the resistance against global authority is organized horizontally. The worldwide anti-globalization movement arose largely from the resistance of the Zapatistas in Mexico, autonomists and anarchists in Europe, farmers and workers in Korea, and popular rebellions against financial institutions like the IMF. I'm not familiar with them. Why is my fucking not working? The IMF. Why have I not heard of that before? Come on, come on. Why do you do this? International Monetary Fund. Interesting. I'm wondering if it's similar to like the Days group from from goodness, Mr. Robot. I don't know. I don't want to get into conspiracies like that, but it's always kind of troubling when you have a global financial institution. Popular like the IMF, occurring across the world from South Africa to India. The Zapatistas, the Zapatistas and autonomists especially are marked by their anti-authoritarian cultures, a marked break from the hierarchy of Marxist-Leninists who had dominated international struggles in previous generations. I've heard a lot about these folks, but I haven't really looked into them because of the history of Lenin and Marx. I'm just like, I don't know if I want to get into that. But there seems to be a lot of interesting ideas from that camp. Unfortunately, of course, the applications of those ideas, the execution, is found wanting. The anti-globalization movement proved itself to be a global force. In June 1999, when hundreds of thousands of people in cities from London, England to Port Harcourt, Nigeria took the streets for the J18 Carnival against capitalism. In November later that year, participants in the same movement shocked the world by shutting down the summit of the World Trade Organization in Seattle. The most remarkable thing about this global resistance is that it was created horizontally by diverse organizations and affinity groups pioneering new forms of consensus. Ooh, I like that. This movement had no leaders and fomented constant opposition to all forms of authority that developed within its ranks. Ooh, I like that. Those who attempted to put themselves permanently in the role of chief or spokesperson were ostracized. I like that. or even treated to a pie in the face. A high-profile organizer, Medea Benjamin, was at the U.S. Social Forum in 2007. Oh, as high-profile organizer. Okay, I was missing a little. But yeah, that's interesting. So I wonder if she got the actual pie in the face. I guess so, but I might have to look that up. This is how much longer? Oh my gosh, this is much longer. And I wanted to finish both of these. I might have to stop talking and just read. Where was I? I should have highlighted. Okay, find the face. Okay, right here. Lacking leadership, short on formal organization, and constantly critiquing internal power dynamics and studying more egalitarian ways of organizing, anti-globalization activists went on to achieve further tactical victories. In Prague in September 2000, 15,000 protesters overcame the massive police presence and broke up the last day of the summit of the International Monetary Fund. In Quebec City in April 2001, protesters breached the security fence around the summit planning the free trade area of the Americas. Police responded by filling the city with so much tear gas that it even entered the building where the talks were taking place. Consequently, many city residents came to favor the protesters. Police had to step up repression to contain the growing anti-globalization movement. They arrested 600 protesters and injured 3 with gunfire at the European Union summit in Sweden in 2001. And a month later, they murdered anarchist Carlo Giuliani at the G8 summit in Genoa. Wow. Where 150,000 people had gathered to protest the conference of the 8 most powerful world governments. Yeah, that's concerning. And that's another scary part about like using violence as an answer is because especially nowadays with the technology at play, you can create like these people can create private police forces or even just use the government's police forces to shut down any number of protesters. They can use all these tanks and tear gas or advanced weaponry and stuff like that. Like they can break that stuff out. And I know there might be people in the military who might rebel as well, but like, will it be enough when you have this level of technology and stuff like that to use? This is why I think personally, I might be wrong, but personally, I would love to do bottom-up approaches where we create multiple types of organizational structures and use technology for the benefit of these anarchic and decentralized, tools in which empower people to create these sort of decentralized communities non-violently, right? Again, I might be naive, I might be wrong, but I personally would love to do more of that. And that's why I spend so much time learning about this stuff, because I want to figure out, what are the systems, what are the, strategies, what are the underlying mechanisms that are important to know and to realize in order to build something of that effect, something of that type. I don't know. The Dissent Network arose out of the European anti-globalization movement to organize major protests against the G8 summit in Scotland in 2005. The network also organized major protest camps and blockade actions against the G8 summit in Germany in 2007 and helped with the mobilization against the G8 summit in Japan in 2008. There's a lot of data stuff. I honestly don't care too much about this stuff. Like when I hear this stuff, it's hard for me to put a picture to all of it, and it's just kind of words. But it's interesting to hear that this has been happening. Like people are fighting and stuff like that. Without a central leadership or hierarchy, the network facilitated communication between groups located in different cities and countries and organized major meetings to discuss and decide on strategies for upcoming actions against the G8. The strategies were intended to enable diverse approaches, so many affinity groups could organize mutually supportive actions within a common framework rather than carrying out the orders of a central organization. Awesome. I wonder, what are some of those strategies? That's what I really want to get into. For example, here we go. A blockade plan might designate one road leading to the summit site as a zone for people who prefer peaceful or theatrical tactics, while another entrance might be designated for people who wish to construct barricades and are willing to defend themselves against the police. These strategy meetings drew people from 12 countries and included translations in multiple languages. Afterwards, flyers, announcements, position papers, and critiques were translated and uploaded to a website. The anarchist forms of coordination used by the protesters repeatedly proved effective at countering and sometimes even outmaneuvering the police and corporate media, which enjoyed teams of thousands of paid professionals, advanced communications and surveillance infrastructure, and resources far beyond what was available to the movement. That's what I like to hear. The fact that, yes, these people might have more advanced technology, but you can still use really clever tactics and strategies and all this other stuff to beat around that, right? To defeat those sorts of things, that sort of advancement or, um, you know, goodness, good word for it. But yeah, you get what I mean. But that's what I like to hear. Again, I want to hear more about the strategy stuff. Very interesting. Ooh, might have to pause to get more water. The anti-globalization movement can be contrasted with the anti-war movement that rose in response to the so-called war on terror. Oh, that was a terrible, stupid. Ugh. After September 11, 2001, world leaders sought to undercut the growing anti-capitalist movement by identifying terrorism as enemy number one. See, war is the health of the state, thus reframing the narrative of global conflict. Excuse me. Following the collapse of the Soviet bloc at the end of the Cold War, they needed a new war and a new opposition. People had to view their options as a choice between hierarchical powers, statist democracy, or fundamentalist terrorists, rather than between domination and freedom. Right? In the conservative environment that followed September 11th, the anti-war movement quickly came to be dominated by reformist and hierarchically organized groups. Although the movement kicked off with the most widely attended day of protest in human history in February 15, 2003, the organizers deliberately channeled the energy of the participants into rigidly controlled rituals that did not challenge the war machine. Within 2 years, the anti-war movement had completely squandered the momentum built up during the anti-globalization era. That is unfortunate. The anti-war movement could not stop the occupation of Iraq or Iraq, or even sustain itself, because people are neither empowered nor fulfilled by passively participating in symbolic spectacles. In contrast, the effectiveness of decentralized networks can be seen in the many victories of the anti-globalization movement. The summit shut down, the collapse of the WTA, the World Trade Organization, and the FTAA, the dramatic scaling back of the IMF and World Bank. This non-hierarchical movement demonstrated that people desire to free themselves from domination, and that they have the ability to cooperate in an anti-authoritarian manner, even in large groups or strangers from different nations and cultures. Beautiful, beautiful. So from scientific studies of human history to protesters making history today, the evidence overwhelmingly contradicts the status account of human nature. Exactly. Rather than coming from a brutally authoritarian ancestry and later subsuming these instincts into a competitive system based on obedience to authority, humankind has not had one single trajectory. Our beginnings seem to have been characterized by a range between strict egalitarianism and small-scale hierarchy with a relatively equal distribution of wealth. When coercive hierarchies did appear, they did not spread everywhere immediately, and often provoked significant resistance. Even where societies are ruled by authoritarian structures, resistance is every much part of the social reality as domination and obedience. Really? Even today, right? People love to say, "Oh yeah, capitalism is great," blah 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 blah. But people are still resisting. People are still like, "Oh yeah, no, this is not good." That shows you that we are not inherently some domination, thing. A lot of people just want to be left alone. A lot of people just want to be like chill. Furthermore, the state and authoritarian civilization are not the last stops on the line. Even though a global revolution has yet to succeed, we have many examples of post-state societies in which we can make out hints of a stateless future. Whew. I might have to stop now. No. It's last of my water. Let's see if I can power through. Half a century ago, anthropologist Pierre Clastres concluded that the stateless and anti-authoritarian societies he studied in South America were not holdouts from a primordial era as other Westerners had assumed. He argued that, on the contrary, they were well aware of the possible emergence of the state, and they were organizing themselves to prevent this. It turns out that many of them were in fact post-state societies founded by refugees and rebels who had fled from or overthrown earlier states. Ooh. Similarly, anarchist Peter Limborn Wilson hypothesized that anti-authoritarian societies in Eastern North America formed in resistance to the hierarchical. Um, I don't know why I just lost my place. Hierarchical Hopewell mound building societies, and recent research seems to be confirming this. What others had interpreted as ahistorical ethnicities were the end results of political movements. The Cossacks, who had inhabited the Russian frontiers, provide another example of this phenomenon. Their societies were founded by people fleeing serfdom and other inconveniences of government oppression. They learned horsemanship and developed impressive martial skills to survive in the frontier environment and defend themselves against neighboring states. Eventually, they came to be viewed as a distinct ethnicity with a privileged autonomy, and the Tsar, whom their ancestors renounced, sought them out as military allies. According to Yale political scientist James C. Scott, everything about such societies, from the crops they grow to their kinship systems, can be read as anti-authoritarian social strategies. Scott documents the Hill people of Southeast Asia as an agglomeration of societies existing in rugged terrain where fragile state structures face a severe disadvantage. For hundreds of years, these people have resisted state domination, including frequent wars of conquest or extermination by the Chinese Empire and periods of continuous attacks by slavers. Cultural and linguistic diversity is exponentially greater in the hills than in the state-controlled rice paddies of the valleys, where a monoculture holds sway. Hill people frequently speak multiple languages and belong to multiple ethnicities. Their social organization is suited for quick and easy dispersal and reunification, allowing them to escape assaults and wage guerrilla warfare. Their kinship systems are based on overlapping and redundant relationships that create a strong social network and limit the formalization of power. Their oral cultures are more decentralized and flexible than nearby literate cultures, in which reliance on the written word encourages orthodoxy and gives extra power to those with the resources to keep records. A lot of great points here. All right, I won't go over all of them because I do want to get this done very quickly. Have to go make some food and drink some water. But just a small thing about the writing forms. Again, a lot of times we assume that writing is more advanced, more complex than an oral tradition, but that's not really so. And we're finding this out more and more today, is that oral societies, oral history, has a very, very complex way of passing information along, and a very surprising and powerful way of maintaining the veracity of that information across generations. Where even something written down, right? When we write something down, it loses a lot of the context. So to where a lot of people today don't even read, right? A lot of people today don't even know how to read something that was written 100 years ago, much less a couple hundred years ago, right? But people who have oral histories, they were able to understand understand a lot of the context and the complexities around an idea or a story that is passed down to them for generations, for thousands of years, right? Many of the African and other indigenous peoples are able to recall stories that were thousands of years old, thousands, not just hundreds, thousands of years old, right? And that's not something written languages can do. Not just because written language is relatively recent, but also because just written language is just has a pros and cons, right? The cons is that the pros are obvious, like we know a lot of them today, but the cons is that what they mention here, but also for the fact that information is harder to convey in written form, right? In terms of all the context, we lose a lot of that context. It's harder to maintain the language itself because language itself is very shifting, is ever shifting. Like English today is different from English 100 years ago, 400 years ago, and so on and so forth. So when you write something down, that's like it's just a snapshot of the current language, the current culture, the current understanding of things. And so as time changes, the written word can't change with it. You just have to read it as it is, and people might translate it, but a lot of things get lost in translation, right? But with oral histories, yes, a lot of things change, but not much gets lost. Sometimes it does, don't get me wrong. And usually, though, a lot gets lost when people die, when elders are killed before their time, before they can pass on much of that information and the context and stuff like that. So it's pros and cons to either one, but to view one as more complex than the other, more advanced, is quite frankly stupid and short-sighted. There's a lot of problems with both, and yeah, yeah, that's a very important part because I didn't even think about the fact that written language is inherently less centralized or more centralized tradition. Well, maybe not. Maybe not more centralized because in many of these other cultures, griots or certain people are dedicated as storytellers and things like that. So it can be centralized in that way. However, like I said here, it can be more centralized, right? Because you can you can if you only teach certain people how to write and read, then only certain people are even allowed that. So knowledge is power, so they can gain that information, that power for themselves. While other folks in oral histories, when they talk, pretty much everybody can hear and understand all this stuff. Unless you create a new language or unless you create a secret society, right? You have to go to extra steps to make um, oral history more centralized and more vertically empowered rather than a written language, which is inherently easier to centralize and to form a power structure around. So I never even thought about it like that, but that's another kind of pros and cons for each of these. The Hill people have an interesting relationship with the surrounding states. The people of the valleys view them as living ancestors, even though they have formed as a response to the valley civilizations. Ooh. They are post-state, not pre-state, but the ideology of the state refuses to recognize such a category as post-state, because the state supposes itself to be the pinnacle of progress, right? Oh, yeah, all the time. Subjects of the valley civilization frequently headed for the hills to live more freely. However, hold up. Yeah, okay. Thought I skipped something. However, the narratives and mythologies of the Chinese, Vietnamese, Burmese, and other authoritarian civilizations in the centuries leading up to World War II seem to be designed to prevent their members from going back to those perceived as barbarians. According to some scholars, the Great Wall of China was built as much to keep the Chinese in as the barbarians out. Now that's an interesting idea. And then a lot of scientists I've been reading some cultural studies on that, and it seems to be true because the Great Walls of China are cool, yeah, but in a lot of the places it's not much of a wall, right? And a lot of the places is not very tall either. It's very easy for people to climb over if invaders really want to get in. So it definitely makes sense that it's seen as a political thing. It's like don't leave, right? It's trying to create friction points from people leaving and things like that. Yet in the valley civilizations of China and Southeast Asia, myths, language, and rituals that might explain such cultural defections were suspiciously lacking. Culture was used as another great wall to hold these fragile civilizations together. No wonder the barbarians gave up written language in favor of a more decentralized oral culture. Without written records and a specialized class of scribes, history became common property rather than a tool for indoctrination. Ooh, that's another point, right? Because you can't write down everything, right? With written stories, everybody can keep a story, even if only certain people might hold most of the stories, like griots and stuff like that, storytellers. Everybody might have a story and they can pass it along, just like we do today with podcasts or whatever, right? Podcasts are inherently more decentralized than books, than writing books, right? Because you can have publishers with most books, like at least how it is today. It's easy to centralize it with publishers and all this other stuff. But podcasts, you just talk and just boom, it's out there. It's like this video, right? It's like YouTube. It's inherently more decentralized. But of course, it's not, it's more decentralized, but it's not perfectly decentralized. Just like we see with YouTube and all this other stuff today, it can be used as a tool for centralization and things like that, depending on the overall culture and all this other stuff. So it's always a spectrum. It's always more complex. Far from being a necessary social advancement that people readily accept, the state is an imposition that many people try to flee. A proverb from the Burmese encapsulates this. It is easy for a subject to find a lord, but hard for a lord to find a subject. Ain't that something? In Southeast Asia, until recently, the primary goal of warfare was not to capture territory, but to capture subjects, as people frequently ran for the hills to create egalitarian societies. It is ironic that so many of us are convinced that we have an essential need for the state, when in fact it is the state that needs us. God dang. This is pretty short. I might go ahead and finish this. Let me go ahead and get some more water. Let me pause this. I know why I say pause. I can't really pause it. I might be able to create a new scene. Oop. Okay. My stuff probably went black. Probably couldn't hear me. I'm creating a new scene. Just gonna be like, pause. Okay, forget it. I'm just gonna leave. I'll be right back. Okay, back at it. Let's go ahead and finish this up. This chapter. A broader sense of self. 100 years ago, Peter Kropotkin, the Russian geographer and anarchist theorist, published his revolutionary book, Mutual Aid. I've heard a lot about that. And haven't read it yet. I should. Which argues that the tendency of people to help one another reciprocally, and the spirit of solidarity was a greater factor in human evolution than competition. I agree. We can see cooperative behavior similarly playing a role in survival of many species of mammals, birds, fish, and insects. Still, the belief persists that humans are naturally selfish, competitive, warlike, and male-dominated. This belief is founded upon a misrepresentation of so-called primitive peoples as brutal and of the state as a necessary pacifying force. Yeah, exactly. Right? Exactly. People think, oh yeah, we're terrible people, so we need civilization to rein us in. We all have some inner brutality, some inner violent creature waiting to get out, and we need laws and the rulers to keep us in check. No. No. Oh, goodness. The way in which we delude ourselves. Westerners who see themselves as a pinnacle of human evolution typically view hunter-gatherers and other stateless peoples as relics of the past, even if they are alive in the present. And in doing so, they are presuming that history is an inevitable progression. Oh, excuse me, goodness. From less to more complex. What was I saying? And that Western civilization is more complex than other cultures. And history is not very simple in many ways. If history is organized into the Stone Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age, Industrial Age, Information Age, and so on, someone who does not use metal tools must still be living in the Stone Age, right? But it is Eurocentric, to say the least, to assume that a hunter-gatherer who knows the uses of 1,000 different plants is less sophisticated than an operator at a nuclear power plant who knows how to push a few thousand different buttons but doesn't know where his food comes from. Right. Like, this gets me every time. Like, the fact that we say, oh, no, these people are simple, complex, we're more complex, we're blah, 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 blah. But the fact is, most of us live the same type of lives that we did back then. Right? Literally, we work every day to feed ourselves. For food, for a house over our heads and all this other stuff. Like, how is that more advanced than people working to feed themselves in the 10,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago? Only difference is that we have more conveniences today in many ways, right? Yeah, yes, it's nice that we've made some progress. I'm not going to say we haven't made any progress, but it's not a straight line, right? We've lost a lot of things and we gained a lot of things, The question is, how do we pick up what we lost? How do we know that some of the things that we lost we need, right? Like, how do we pick some of that back up? Because we have a lot of problems today, it's very frustrating to hear that. Anyways, and another thing, like, I know I need to just finish this, but like, it's just so silly because once again, like they said, hunter-gatherer people, they can go out in the wild or whatever, right? And they don't have a different word for the wild, for nature. It's not a different word. It's just life. It's just the environment, right? But they can go outside and see plants, and that's like their Walmart, right? Where you maybe even better because at Walmart, many of us get lost and we don't know what's going on. They're like, where is this? Where is that? But many of these people can go outside and they know exactly where they are. They know exactly where to find what they need to find or how to find the tracks for it and all this other stuff. Where we might look to a sign in order to find the right shelf for the right food, they can look at the signs of the ground, right, or the signs of the air, or the signs in the that they're smelling or they're seeing in order to find, the right aisle, the right path, the right trail, the right tree, right, to find whatever they're looking for. The fact that they can memorize hundreds, if not thousands, of different types of plants and uses and all this other stuff, just like that, is incredible, right? Whereas we can't. Like, most of us today can't even memorize many things beyond, our specific area of expertise. And even then, a lot of people don't even know their area of expertise very well, And again, I'm not saying these people were better than us per se, but they've had it. It's not that they're less complex or that we're better. It's just it's a pros and cons. I think we need to do a much better job of looking back in history to see what we can learn from these people. Because these are people just like us. Just like we look back and see what we can learn from Einstein or from just a random Joe Blow living 100 years ago, or the different parts of history. We can look back 10,000 years or 100,000 years, or even people that's still alive today that live, that type of life. It's there's so much to learn, and I wish more people were open to doing that learning. Let's continue. Capitalism may be capable of feats of production and distribution that have never been possible before, but at the same time, this society is tragically unable to keep everyone fed and healthy, and has never existed without gross inequalities, oppression, and environmental devastation. One might argue that members of our society are socially stunted, if not outright primitive, when it comes to being able to cooperate and organize ourselves without authoritarian control. That's another point. That's another great point, right? And they've studied this once again. Like, Especially, I've been reading about urban planning and about the problem with current day suburbia, the fact that, or with car dependent suburbia, the fact that kids are not allowed to walk to school, alone, not able to walk to school or walk to the store or the park or use public transit on their own. That very idea is seen as like irresponsible or crazy to a lot of people. And that's because of the environment that we structure. It's not because it's more responsible to never let your kids walk alone. It's the fact that we've created our environment so that it's so unsafe and so disgusting that we can't even see the benefits of letting our kids or our young ones do these sorts of actions, right? And that's deeply problematic because they did a study where um, kids who were raised in suburbia and stuff like that didn't even watch out for risks, like weren't or they're simply not able to take responsible risks, right? For instance, they don't, when they're playing on a playground or near a street or something like that, they don't scream car when a car is coming because they expect an adult to do so. They expect someone else to be like, oh, to tell them to get out the way or to tell them when there's danger. They don't look out for themselves. They don't look out for their peers. They expect some adult, some authority to do that for them. And I remember when I was a kid, like we used to play in the street, whatever, all the time. And when a car came, like, car, you gotta move out the way, whatever. Like we looked out for each other. It was a normal thing. And then dating back further, it's even people were even like back in my day, people were even more independent. They went out to the store alone. They went out all these places, walking to school and all this other stuff alone, or rather with their peers. And people learned these social cues and things like that. And we actually see a similar problem with cars in general, with car driving, right? When pedestrian roads started to be used more for cars rather than pedestrians, then they started to have to use stop signs and all this other stuff before. Like, did you actually know that the first stop signs were manned by people? And people would have a sign, but they would be the ones actually telling people, cars, what to do because they couldn't imagine traffic being automated, right? They said traffic was such a complex thing that humans had to be in charge of doing it, of telling people when to go, when to stop, and all this other stuff, right? Because prior to that, traffic was a thing of individual, a bunch of individuals. It's a very complex thing where a whole bunch of people, like in the city, will be going this way and that way all across the street. And so you have to pay attention to your surroundings and move around when people are coming or when horses are coming. And it was a constant negotiation of, how to go across the street. And that may sound scary to people. That may sound primitive in some ways. But the fact that today, people don't even look anymore. People don't rarely ever look across the street both ways and all this other stuff. They just look for the light, the stop sign. That's it. They just look at, there are stop signs, there are light. That's it. This is what you hear so many problems of people getting hit by cars or bicyclists and pedestrians because people in the cars don't pay attention to anything else and they see that the road is just for the car, right? And you don't have to think about anything else besides stopping at a stop sign or at a red light or whatever, right? Like it's rarely ever an actual kind of complex, people might say chaotic, but complex relationship between you and other people on the road, right? It's very concerning because a lot of our social cues are very much almost devolved, right? Very much can be seen as primitive because many people again do not have good social cues. They can't negotiate. You hear negotiation skills is a good thing, is a popular thing. You try to use it to get a better wages or whatever, but most people can't negotiate because when you go to the store, you don't negotiate. There's just a price and you pay that price. That's it, right? But if you go to some other place that's a free market or open marketplace or like a bazaar or whatever they call it, I've never been to one, but of course you've heard about it all the time, and they negotiate like, okay, there's a there might be a price in here, there might not, and you say, oh, I'm going to pay this amount or this, blah blah blah, and that's a complex social relationship that's going on there. It's a complex social behavior that's going on there, and a lot of us, myself included, we don't have that. So who's more primitive? But it's not all around, right? It's in certain ways. Because yeah, maybe we're more advanced that we can use a computer in really cool ways, like the fact that you know how to use search better or something like that. It's very advanced in some ways, but in other ways we're very much stunted. A nuanced view of stateless societies shows them to have their own developed forms of social organization and their own complex histories, both of which contradict Western notions about natural human characteristics. The great diversity of human behaviors that are considered normal in different societies calls into question the very idea of human nature. Our understanding of human nature directly influences what we expect of people. Exactly, right? If humans are naturally selfish and competitive, we cannot expect to live in a cooperative society. Mm. That's our excuse, right? When we see how differently other cultures have characterized human nature, we can recognize human nature as a cultural value. Exactly. Ooh, I was on it, man. And an idealized normative mythology that justifies the way a society is organized. Western civilization devotes an immense amount of resources to social control, policing, and cultural production, reinforcing capitalistic values or capitalist values. The Western idea of human nature functions as a part of this social control. Yep. Discouraging rebellion against authority. We are taught from childhood that without authority, human life would descend into chaos. Yep. The very word anarchy is attributed to chaos. Oh, it's anarchy. It was going on over there. It's anarchy. Like, no, it's not. It's just chaos or just disorder or whatever. It's not the same thing as anarchy. Ah, this view of human nature was advanced by Hobbes and other European philosophers to explain the origins and purpose of the state. This marked a shift to scientific arguments at a time when divine arguments no longer sufficed. Ooh, and I've actually been reading Hegel recently, and he's been talking about this. I think he's taking shots against Hobbes because he was talking about how people look at the world a certain way, and then they apply this beautiful, beautiful word in here, a monochromatic lens. No, he said a monochromatic. Shoot, I forgot his word. I got it over here. It was really beautiful because he was saying how different people view the world in different ways, right? And as we try to create, I'm very much simplifying, paraphrasing here, but basically saying, something along the lines of people who are trying to explain the world, especially the nature of the divine or the the mind, right? The spirit. Um, and back then, I think they used spirit in terms of the mind, the consciousness, the conscious being, right? We try to explain the world in these different ways, but in doing so, or a lot of people, some people use science or use this understanding of the world to view the world just from one perspective. They say, "Oh, this is how the world works," and then they try to apply that to everything. It's like a cookie cutter explanation that seems like it's explaining things, but really it's not, right? And if anything, it's blocking you from actually understanding the world and making it very difficult to get a real comprehensive understanding of it. Here, I wrote it in the description here. Come on, YouTube, why you do this to me? Oh, that's the chat. Yeah, here we go. Monochromatic formalism. Monochromatic formalism, where he said, people are trying to describe the absolute, right? Everything that there is through one lens, through a formulaic expression of understanding, a formulaic way of or pattern of understanding the world, and say, oh yeah, this is how it works, supply and demand, or some mechanistic view of the world. And in doing so, they apply that same idea to everything, to how economy works, to how human nature works, to how this works, to how that works, right? But he's saying that's wrong, right? Because it creates it devoids you, strips the world of its depth and its diversity, right? He says it doesn't it creates like a fake diversity, where it doesn't actually give you the full breadth or the full depth of the world. And I think he was taking shots at people like Hobbes in his time because that was written in the 1800s. So it's crazy to see that here too. And he's right. We see that today, even to this day, where people say, "Oh yeah, no, this is how the world works," and they try to fit everything into that box, fit that shape into everything and use it everywhere, and say, "Oh yeah, blah 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 blah." But no, it's complex. It's a very interesting interaction. It's a systems thinking, right? It's different types of systems at different levels that interact in different ways and behave differently depending on the level and all this other stuff, and it's really amazing. But people try to be too reductive. Anyways, let's continue. And it's very much a justification, right? To say, "Oh, this is how the state, this is how humans work," to justify the state. I'm like, you don't need to justify. That's literally confirmation bias. You're coming up with a reason for why something is the way it is, to justify the way it is, not to actually criticize the way it is. Anyways, Hobbes and his contemporaries lacked the psychological, historical, and archaeological and ethnographic data that we have today, and their thinking was still heavily influenced by a legacy of Christian teaching. Even now that we have access to an abundance of information contradicting Christian cosmology and political science, the popular conception of human nature has not changed dramatically. Why are we still so miseducated? A second question answers the first. Who controls education in our society? Nonetheless, anyone who counters the authoritarian dogma faces an uphill battle against the charge of romanticism. Oh yeah, you hear all. Oh yeah, no, you're just being naive. You don't understand human nature. Blah blah blah. You just haven't lived life. You haven't seen enough of the world, right? You hear that all the time. Like, no, just disgusting. Goodness. And yeah, I've heard that myself as a dreamer, as a person, as a thinker, as an ambitious person. Who wants to change the world, who wants the world to be different. Here all the time, it can't change. This is how it is, all this other stuff, and it's just like, but never sat right with me. I've been through plenty of things. I've seen more than most people have ever seen or will live throughout their life, even in my short life. But people love to be bought and sold by this idea of the state and of human nature as some evil, terrible thing, because it justifies, right? It justifies how they live their life and what they're willing to accept, right? Because if they're wrong, then that means they were wrong, and maybe they've done a lot of bad things. I don't know. It could be a lot to a lot of people. People identify so closely with this idea of how the world currently is that criticizing that makes it feel like you're criticizing them. If you say the world is evil, not because humans are evil, but because we created it that way, or to say that, if I say, the systems in which we created in America is evil, capitalism is evil, right? Some people who identify with that so closely think I'm saying that they are evil, right? As like personally, because they would rather say, no, all humans are evil, but I'm better because I'm doing this, that, and the other, right? It's easier for them to justify how we treat the world and how we do things that way. At least that's some of it, right? I don't want to be too reductive there. But if human nature is not fixed, if it can encompass a wide range of possibilities, couldn't we use a romantic dose of imagination in envisioning new possibilities? Exactly. The acts of rebellion occurring within our society right now, from the fast land peace camps to the really, really free markets, I really want to build that myself. Some digital version of it if possible. Contain the seeds of a peaceful and open-handed society. Popular responses to natural disasters such as Hurricane Katrina and New Orleans show that everyone has the potential to cooperate when a dominant social order is disrupted. These examples point the way to a broader sense of self, an understanding of human beings as creatures capable of a wide range of behaviors. One might say selfishness is natural, and in that people inevitably live according to their own desires and experiences. But egoism need not be competitive or dismissive of others. Our relationships extend far beyond our bodies and our minds. We live in communities, depend on ecosystems for food and water, and need friends, families, and lovers for our emotional health. Without institutionalized competition and exploitation, a person's self-interest overlaps with the interests of her community and her environment. Seeing our relationships with our friends and nature as fundamental parts of ourselves expands our sense of connection with the world and our responsibility for it. It is not in our self-interest to be dominated by authorities or to dominate others. In developing a broader sense of self, we can structure our lives and communities accordingly. That is beautiful. Beautiful. I can't wait to get to the next couple of chapters and sections and all this other stuff. I've talked enough today, but this is a great way of ending it. Read this book. Do your own research. Check out my other videos if you like. Please put in the comments your own thoughts and what you've learned from this, what you got from this. I would love to know what you think about all this stuff. Like, do you think this world is possible? Do you think all this is just some boo-boo, or do you think there's some worthwhile information to be had here? What are your thoughts on how the world is today and how we can change it, and how we can create a better world? I'd love to know your thoughts. And thank you, as always, for listening, for watching, and have a great day.